I will present a working paper on something similar to or related to what had been discussed earlier, but it's more about cooperation and coordination rather than competition. But it's also related to competition. It is in some sense somewhat different from what you have presented here because I draw upon the literature in public management and the framework to understand this collaboration. So what I'm trying to do is to draw upon the collaborative governance framework to analyze the free trade area arrangement, we call it SIPA, between Hong Kong and the mainland since 2003. To put a long story short, this free trade area consists of 4 areas, liberalization of trade in goods. Basically, Hong Kong is a free port, so mainly applying zero tariff to Hong Kong goods. More importantly, and this is the key of SIPA, which is the liberalization of trade in services, lowering barrier of market entry for Hong Kong service providers, in particular the small and medium-sized enterprises, and of course something that attracts a lot of attention of relaxation of individual visits. We also have financial cooperation and many others. So this is the core of SIPA, and some other important areas are trade facilitation measures, and to a lesser extent, mutual recognition of professional qualifications. So this is the analytical framework from a major journal in public administration, J. Park. So it's very simple in terms of laying out some of the contextual, what we call systemic context. These include a variety of features in the socio-political environment that provide incentive and disincentive for the various actors. And of course, some of these can be important drivers that bring about intergovernmental or inter-organizational collaborations. Hopefully, if that works out, it will lead to a collaborative dynamics if they have, principled engagement. I will explain all of this very briefly, shared commitment, and also capacity for joint action. If it works out, then it will produce some output and outcomes that would in turn lead to the progress or the absence of it in terms of collaboration. So in a sense, this is an inter-organizational, intergovernmental analytical framework trying to identify various factors that drive collaboration between different parties, in this case, over the FTA arrangement. So who are the key actors in this respect? I will explain it. This is important because we are talking about not only Hong Kong, but also various agencies in the central authorities, in the central government in Beijing, but most importantly in Guangdong province, the neighboring province of Hong Kong. Okay, so Guangdong, for those who are not aware of it. And Guangdong, of course, is our major economic partner. So when we talk about economic relations with China, we talk about Guangdong a lot because this is a very important actor in this respect. In the environment or the system context, so something are very important, most importantly, China's WTO entry, which has a major impact on Hong Kong's role as a gateway, the aftermath of the Asian financial tsunami, and also the severe acute respiratory syndrome, SARS, which impact on the Hong Kong economy. So these have served as the external impact in the environment on these various actors. So Hong Kong's economy was not in very good shape in around 2003 and 2004. So this is the broad environmental context, and of course, in view of that, Hong Kong's business sector proposed this FTA idea to the Hong Kong government, who later took it up to Beijing, and Beijing, of course, around that time also changed its policy toward Hong Kong because around that time they believed that Hong Kong's economic problems was the cause of its social and political discontent. And later, soon afterwards, we also have the 2008 financial tsunami. So all these chain of events, provide some of the incentive and disincentive for some of the key players. Okay. So I would argue the key driver that bring about this intergovernmental collaboration are the leaders. Okay. And of course, there are other factors that have been explained in this framework, including this various aspects of intergovernmental relationship concerning the incentive, concerning the interdependence, and other things. But I think the leadership is most important in driving this. In the context of Hong Kong, of course, there was a change of administrative leadership around 2001, and Chief Executive Mr. Tong and later Donald Tsang have been very supportive of a closer economic relationship with the mainland. So this is very important, but this is not enough. In the case of Guangdong province, at the beginning, Guangdong wasn't particularly interested in this deepening of cooperation. The current chairman of the standing committee of the NPC, Mr. Jiang, who was the party secretary at that time, wanted the Pearl River Delta cooperation, but he was promoted further to the central authorities. And the party secretary, Wang Yang, had been very supportive of closer economic relationship with Hong Kong. So, of course, at the beginning, the central government's incentive was very strong, but Guangdong was not as supportive until much later. Wang Yang have put Hong Kong economic relations or Hong Kong economic cooperation as a key aspect of his policy toward Hong Kong. And of course, the central government at that time, Hu Jintao and Wen Jiabao, have a very strong political connection with Wang Yang and supporting Wang Yang as well. So these are some of the political contexts. Incentive, I detailed some of the mutual incentive for Hong Kong and Guangdong. Hong Kong, of course, in the early stage, most importantly, to get entry in the service market in the mainland ahead of the WTO's schedule, to, in a sense, expand mainland tourists into Hong Kong, to a lesser extent, enjoy zero tariff, and also, of course, in parallel, to expand professional services in the mainland. But Guangdong is a very key player because Guangdong also benefit from SIPA. They benefit from SIPA because of our close economic relations. Another extra incentive is some of these measures will apply to Guangdong first before they would be applied to the rest of China or the rest of the coastal region. So Beijing would have to decentralize power to Guangdong first. So this is similar to what happened 35 years ago. Guangdong would be in a very privileged position because it would have additional economic policy incentive to approve that. So in the variety of intergovernmental mechanisms that were examined, they all exhibit some of these characteristics in the collaborative dynamics that was articulated in this framework. For instance, the various mechanisms allow these different stakeholders to have fair representation and engage in a lot of intergovernmental discussion and communications. They have the shared motivation because they couldn't do it alone. Okay, Guangdong and Hong Kong will have to work together to bring this thing forward. And of course, they need to build up capacity for joint action. For instance, around 2003, this Hong Kong-Guangdong Cooperative Joint Conference at the intergovernmental level was upgraded and revamped to improve the cooperation in these various economic and social sectors, including SIPA. So this is a very rough summary of all that. So these produced various outputs and ultimately led to what I would consider to be the outcome of collaboration, which is an extension by 10 waves of the supplement to SIPA. So my outcome is not the economic outcome, it's intergovernmental cooperation supplement. So they carry out a lot of negotiations and adopted joint policies, joint activities like joint promotion, monitoring, for instance, improving custom clearance, and also other kinds of compliance mechanisms. So that basically complete this kind of analysis. So I would argue the conclusion of these 10 supplements is a very important indicator of the success of collaboration. So I draw my data from documentary analysis and a small number of interviews. Let me use the remaining 4 or 5 minutes to explain these mechanisms. So at the very top, you have a joint steering committee chaired by the Ministry of Commerce and then led by the Vice Minister and the Financial Secretary of Hong Kong. So that is the highest level coordination mechanism, but this is not the most intensive. So you have a lot more senior official meetings that deal with the more practical matters concerning SIPA. And then, of course, it's very strange because under one country, we negotiated in accordance with the rules of WTO. It's like international trade negotiation. So we are guided by very institutionalized mechanisms for this discussion. And of course, under the Hong Kong-Guangdong Cooperation Framework, there's an expert group on SIPA service. This is one of the key institutional mechanisms. And I would be happy to report, actually, under this expert group arrangement, other areas like environmental protection, Hong Kong and Guangdong have been able to work very closely. And of course, beyond that, there are other kinds of mechanisms or networking mechanisms. And also, each side of the government will also liaise with the various business communities. So this is a very quick overview of the mechanisms and also the output. But there are lots of details concerning that 10 supplements, and the overall CIPA framework is a bit more complicated, but basically Hong Kong goods can go to the mainland without any tariff now, and a lot of service providers have been able to get the service certificate to work in the mainland. But of course, it doesn't mean that they can achieve the expected benefit or whatever expansion as hoped, because there are many other factors beyond the policy that contribute to the success or failure of this business, like the local business environment, like the local implementation. But as you can tell, the CIPA has been, I would argue, in contrast to some of the businessmen, because they hope for huge benefits, in terms of input, in terms of revenue and whatnot, which is very complicated. But I would argue in terms of policy level, the policy outcome is very successful. So for over 400 liberalization measures for trading in services, close to 3,000 certificates to service providers, and also for close to 100,000, for export to the mainland, and of course, over 4,000 Hong Kong citizens have been able to establish individual business. That's the next one. And also, of course, export value of goods enjoying zero tariff has expanded tremendously, tariff savings, and of course, one of the other most obvious benefit is individual visit. Huge growth in visitors coming to Hong Kong, and of course, that has aroused a lot of controversy as well. So that is basically the story. I have a few more slides to show. Okay. Just the individual visitors by 2012 is over 23 million, and now it's over 30 million or close to 40 million. Too many, I think, in the eyes of Hong Kong people, because there are many other group tourists as well, And now, of course, we are talking about over 30 billion by now, in terms of tourist spending in Hong Kong, a huge amount of money. Next slide. Approved certificate, of course, most of them are approved in the early stage, There are fewer now, but the number have been steady. And then in terms of business income also increased. I don't have the latest figure. Okay. Employment created both for mainland and Hong Kong, Of course, in the case of Hong Kong, more drawing from the benefit of tourism. So I would argue we can explore the adoption of this kind of collaborative framework to analyze even intergovernmental cooperation, and I hope the story would be to analyze this not only in the context of Hong Kong and the mainland, but possibly also between other regions in China, provided there are adequate incentive and to some extent, proper guidance from the central authority, which allow them to engage in a mutually beneficial kind of arrangement. I think collaborative outcomes can be achieved. Okay, thank you very much.